You didn't just lose those jobs, Representative. You deliberately destroyed them, he stated. Just 12 words made the country's most famous progressive politician freeze, keeping her written speech hidden face down under her hand. This happened because she was tasked with reading her own words to the exact people it harmed, and she discovered she was utterly incapable of doing it. Behind her, her staff looked away and one completely stopped writing down notes. Mike Johnson never raised his voice. There was absolutely no need to do so. He merely slid a lone piece of paper across the table and watched as a hearing supposedly about the end of the world turned into an investigation of 25,000 vanished careers. To comprehend this, you have to go back about 40 minutes to her self-assured entrance when she believed she was in charge of the story. The Longworth 1100 committee room was significantly more packed than the schedule suggested, and every person there knew why. Whispers had been spreading since the day before that Speaker Johnson had purposely asked to join the Environmental Spending Review Committee. Moreover, he had deliberately emptied his calendar to sit in on a panel he wasn't required to attend. Senior leaders do not clear their mornings merely to ask routine questions. Prominent news stations had set up 3 recording devices in the back, their red lights shining continuously. The public seating area was crammed all the way to the railings, and guards had given up trying to maintain open aisles. Sitting in the 4th tier, after taking an overnight bus ride to attend, was a former pipefitter from Ohio dressed in a bulky coat. He went completely unobserved and would stay that way until much later in the proceedings. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walked in with her typical attitude, projecting a sense that the room was honored by her being there. She set her electronic device down, squaring it perfectly with the border of the desk. With well-practiced exactness, she dragged the mic a bit nearer, and after a quick glance at the broadcast gear, she found the live camera and gave the slight profile she believed looked best. Looking at the individuals behind the dais, she decided, just as she always did, that she had already won the debate before it even began, based entirely on her previous triumphs. When the head of the committee gave her the floor for opening statements, she grabbed the chance eagerly, like a person dying to share a carefully crafted manifesto. "Before this farce begins," she declared, "allow me to illuminate the real purpose of this gathering, because the citizens watching are owed honesty, even if the other side refuses to offer it. This meeting was put together by science deniers who view the planet's health as just a political talking point, representing a large chunk of the country that treats facts like a smorgasbord, picking only what makes them look good and disregarding the rest," she went on, claiming they only sent delegates to waste everyone's clock. A quiet murmur traveled through the crowd, not quite a gasp, but a sound that was chillier and more muted. "I speak for voters who actually know how to read a chart," she continued, a slight grin emerging on her features. "I stand for the urban centers that genuinely power this nation's wealth, not the overlooked middle parts of the country. I won't act like defending my views to climate deniers is a valid activity, as it is just theater. So let's be honest about it instead of mistaking it for real legislating." She leaned backward, visibly satisfied with her performance, having just effectively told the observing citizens of Middle America, those from towns built around manufacturing, religion, and neighborhood eateries, that they were too foolish to understand statistics and only cherry-picked reality. She launched this affront with a grin, certain it had hit the bullseye. It undeniably left a mark, though not at all in the way she had hoped. "If you have ever been talked down to by an individual who hasn't ever stepped foot in your city, please interact with this post, because those comments were fired right at you on live television." Let's keep watching the exchange as Mike Johnson exhibited absolutely no reaction to the insult. His complete silence acted as its own devastating counter-argument. He remained seated with his palms lying peacefully over a lone, inverted page, demonstrating the tranquil restraint of a man who had completely memorized his files and felt zero urge to hurry. He let her finish her speech, allowing the clapping she expected to completely fall flat. He permitted the resulting quiet to drag on uncomfortably, making people in the stands wonder if he had even been listening. At last he angled toward his microphone, starting his rebuttal by offering his thanks. "Representative," he commenced, "I truly appreciate that, as you plainly stated your exact thoughts on the people back home right from the beginning, sparing us a huge amount of effort, and I always respect a testifier who shows their cards right away." A light sprinkle of early chuckles broke out from the room before rapidly fading back into quiet. "I am no scientist," Johnson stated, in the calm, unbothered voice of a man used to analyzing core documents. I wish to make that completely plain so I can't be blamed for acting like one afterward. I am a lawyer, and my skill is in reviewing what a person expressly said, weighing it against what they did later, and seeing if those two things can exist together without conflict. He rested one finger on the upside-down paper and held it right there. Because of that, I don't plan to argue about scientific theories with you today since I'd lose that fight. Instead, I intend to do the one thing a lawyer is actually good at, reciting your own words right back to you. I look forward to it, she fired back, her grin growing even wider. This could be a very short recitation, Johnson pointed out, keeping the document face down. People who knew his strategies understood this maneuver, as he never drew his blade when his adversary was completely prepared to defend. He opted to ask a small, deceptively mild question, filled with the sort of respect someone might show for a neighbor's garden. Would you say you are highly careful with the words you choose, Representative? Do you heavily ponder your phrasing, or do you just speak with emotion and let things happen as they may? Incapable of ignoring a chance to talk about herself, she answered right away. I speak with exactness, she declared, and definitely with emotion, because the stakes are incredibly high. I won't say sorry for sounding urgent when our shared planet is on fire, and while some people here mistake inaction for seriousness, I consider staying calm during a disaster to be a type of lie. So your choice of words is intentional, Johnson recapped. You use desperate phrasing because the reality truly requires it, and you wouldn't call a problem an emergency unless you deeply felt it was one. I would never do that, she agreed. That is the precise kind of jadedness I battle against. Perfect, Johnson responded, lacing his fingers a bit tighter as the verbal trap silently began to shut. I just needed that put into the formal transcript so you can't argue later that you were tricked into taking this position. You chose it. You're proud of it. And you use severe words because you truly mean them. I certainly do, she validated, to which he replied, Hold tightly to that claim, Representative, because we're going to need it in a moment. With zero dramatic flair, he flipped the paper right side up, acting as relaxed as if he were looking at a piece of junk mail. He read it quietly, his mouth barely shifting, confirming his own precision, while the whole chamber watched his every move. That shared focus birthed a thick anxiety that yelling could never have produced. You issued a public statement some time ago? Johnson remarked. It was captured on video, featuring your own face, your own words, with zero aids filtering your message to the media. I am going to read it exactly as spoken because I refuse to let you claim I am twisting your words. He pulled the page a tiny bit nearer, stating, You said, and I quote verbatim, the world is going to end in 12 years if we do not address climate change. He pressed the paper flat, intentionally rubbing it smooth with a pair of fingers, and reiterated, 12 years. A short time span that is only getting shorter. You didn't claim we are dealing with a tough problem. You stated the Earth will be destroyed, which are huge assertions, Representative, perhaps the most radical things a person can declare on TV, setting a timer for the whole planet and starting the clock. Glancing above his glasses, he inquired, Did you write that yourself, or did a junior employee draft it for you to just read? The room fell into that unique kind of quiet that happens when everyone is anxiously waiting for a reply they are slightly afraid to hear. I said it, she replied, her voice firm and metallic, having justified the statement many times before. And I stand by the desperation driving it, as scientists agree we have a tiny window to act. If you want to make fun of the wording, go ahead. But the people laughing at the warning are the exact reason the warning had to be given. No, miss, Johnson replied gently. I am definitely not making fun of the warning, as backing a warning is an honorable thing to do. My question is about the timer. Do you strictly stand by the schedule of 12 years, a number you purposely picked? I stand behind the purpose of what I said, she dodged, prompting him to push back. That wasn't my question. I asked about the exact number of 12 years until global ruin. I maintain my core message, she stated once more while Johnson bobbed his head slowly, looking like a person who had just gotten the precise instrument he needed and wanted to appreciate it for a second before using it. All right, he conceded. Keep that point safe too, as you are balancing multiple promises right now, and I hope the weight doesn't get too heavy before we are done. The elegance of a flawlessly sprung trap is in its slow tightening. It locks closed so gradually that the victim helps trap themselves, staying sure they are about to get away until the very last second. A while after putting that deadline on the world, you were asked about it, Johnson went on. You answered, and once more, these are your precise words, that anybody taking the 12-year deadline as a hard fact had the brainpower of a dweeb. You asserted your comments were full of deadpan irony and comedy, stressing that it was never meant to be a literal ticking clock. Staring up, he spoke to her face to face. So, now I have a problem, Representative, and maybe your skill with graphs can help me out, seeing as I come from those ignored middle states. He knocked on the left half of the page. When you wanted to scare the country, the end of the world was exactly 12 years off, no exceptions. Then he knocked on the right half. But when people checked your math, it turned into an ironic jest, and only idiots would actually believe you. He tilted back, opening his hands like a person confused by simple arithmetic. Therefore, I have to ask, which quote is from the real representative? Because I have been looking at these two opposing views all morning and I literally cannot tell which version of you said which thing. Right then, genuine chuckling broke out, spilling from the gallery and crashing against the front divider. A man in the third tier tried to hide his laughter behind his palm, but his trembling shoulders gave him away. Even a guard stationed by the barrier suddenly took a great interest in the floor patterns. She had openly announced a 12-year doomsday clock to the masses, only to later mock anybody who trusted her, getting the whole hypocrisy caught on tape. With her jaw locked tight, she got ready to strike back, knowing this kind of combative landscape well, and thinking she grasped it better than Johnson did. When things got shaky, she used her usual shield, totally shifting the basic foundation of the fight. I know exactly what is going on here, she announced, her voice rising as she found solace in her usual outrage. This debate was never really about numbers. It's inherently about a young minority female from a blue-collar Bronx upbringing holding this seat of authority and refusing to be quiet, meaning you have no right to preach to me about exactness while running this whole performance aimed just at me. A move you'd never try against an older white man saying the exact same thing in a gentler tone, since you'd call him a progressive thinker, but you call me a liar. And everyone watching sees the double standard and knows the biased reasoning behind it. For a fleeting moment, the mood shifted to her side. It was a cleverly executed verbal counterattack, using deep-seated cultural storylines that everybody there had seen work perfectly in many other places. The automatic habits of the committee kicked in, with reporters scribbling furiously and a backing staffer nodding emphatically. The lady who had laughed earlier now gazed uncomfortably at her fingers, her joy completely gone. The energy had clearly swung back to the representative, and the chamber braced for the normal political reaction, backing away from the first claim instead of dealing with the explosive counterattack. That suspense lasted for about 20 seconds, and it could have hung there forever if not for Johnson's totally surprising response. He showed zero indication of backing down, softening, or taking the defensive stance her claim was meant to cause. Instead, he just looked down the table and gave a tiny nod to another panelist who had been absolutely quiet the whole morning. This panelist was a Democrat, a younger black female who had run on matching political ideas in an area just 2 states over. When she finally turned her microphone on, she did so with the slow intent of a person who had made up her mind during her drive to work and wouldn't change her path. I want to add one thing, she stated, and then I will go back to being quiet. Representative, my history is exactly like yours. Same community hardships, same family struggles, same obstacles beaten to get a chair in this exact room, so I am begging you, do not use our common demographic history as a weapon to hide a factual error about a statistic, because the voters in my district who are deeply afraid of global warming are scared mostly because we told them to be, handing them a firm 12-year clock. Then, when that exact schedule became politically heavy, we casually tossed it aside as just exaggeration. She paused to let it sink in, adding, I have to go back and look those voters in the face. They aren't stupid dweebs. They just believed what we said. You are not allowed to use our mutual roots as a way out of the pledges we made to our people. That history is theirs too, and you are throwing it away right now just to get yourself a short break. The expected political backpedaling completely evaporated from the room, replaced by something much worse for the representative. Permission. The emotional momentum flipped fast. The previously quiet woman in the front started chuckling again, shyly at first, then more loudly, because a younger politician from the representative's own party, with a matching background, had just torn down her armor right to her face on national TV. That friendly fire cut deep, causing a fierce comeback typical of her fighting spirit. She sat up completely straight, pulled the mic nearer, and fired off her whole verbal arsenal, refusing to give up in silence. "If you want to talk about my background," she fired back, speaking fast, deep, and with anger, "then let's look at it closely because I have committed my life to battling for the blue-collar people of this country, while people like you wrote tax breaks for the mega-rich coming from a family of housekeepers and bus drivers. Working as a waitress, clearing plates and making drinks and watching my dad die of sickness without the top-tier medical care that everyone in this room assumes is normal, yet you try to boil all of that down, a whole complicated human life, into a single number on a piece of paper just for a viral internet video? I won't let myself be shrunk into bite-sized clips for audiences who don't know me and don't want to. I fought hard for my seat by aggressively knocking on doors, and I will definitely not say sorry for the scale of the alarms I ring because somebody in this world has to wake people up. It was, without a doubt, a truly strong display, and a bit of empathetic vibe crept back into the room. A few journalists stopped writing, the energy briefly steadied, and you could feel a small part of the crowd remembering why they had liked her in the first place. Johnson let her finish completely, letting the total gravity of her words sit heavily in the chamber, showing no desire to cut her off, and looking like he didn't want to lessen her emotional plea. He waited for the very last sound of her speech to fade before he answered. "Representative," he commenced, his voice so quiet that people actually leaned in to listen. "I trust every single thing you just said. You came up from blue-collar beginnings and made something important out of it, and I would happily shake your hand in any parking lot in America to truly validate that success." He left that affirmation hanging there, a genuine agreement with no secret trap attached. "But," he went on, "you just claimed this questioning is an assault on your background, and I have to tread very carefully here because it absolutely is not, and this has never been a review of your identity." He looked down at his files. "This review is actually about what you did to people who share your exact history, and I think it's fitting that we talk about them quickly right now." A noticeable change happened in the chamber as his fingers reached for the file. It was a quiet shift sensed before anyone could put it into words. A reporter near the front, a lady who had written positive articles about the representative for years and already had a defending storyline brewing in her head, slowly dropped her pen and let it sit on the table. 2 chairs over, a news agency writer started typing wildly, realizing the expected story had abruptly turned into something totally different. Gossip travels through a closed room quicker than actual sound when the shared energy starts to turn, and this chamber was absolutely turning. Every person there, except the speaker herself, could feel the new path. "A few years back," Johnson noted, "a massive company tried to set up shops inside your exact area in Queens in a huge project where they plan to build a main office and, based on the widely agreed upon estimates at the time, bring roughly 25,000 jobs to your home county. Good jobs, like union building work to construct the site." He carefully laid the first page flat in the middle of the desk. "You fiercely fought this plan, and when the business finally backed out and moved those jobs to another state, you took the credit publicly, calling it a win by stating, and I quote verbatim, 'Today was the day everyday New Yorkers defeated Amazon's corporate greed.'" He then set the second page next to the first one, lining up their borders with slow, careful exactness, like a detective matching up 2 crime scene photos. 25,000 careers, he stressed, located in the county where you grew up, wiped out, and you took the cheers for it. He allowed the comment to echo, and the room took the blow right alongside him. The quiet that followed had a totally different feel than the silence after the laughter from before. It wasn't the hanging wait for a joke's end, but the deep, heavy stillness of people quietly doing the math on the massive human toll. They were comparing 25,000 incomes against the truth of a neighborhood, picturing households sitting at dining tables, thinking about people desperate for work who were stripped of the opportunity. A lot of those chances would have helped young people coming from the precise kind of family history you talked about, Johnson kept on in a quiet voice. People who almost never get a second chance of that size in their whole lives. And for the families leaning on them, those careers weren't just numbers. They meant rent money, teeth cleaning for kids, and a real road to moving up in the world. He placed his hand flat next to the papers. "Now this is the exact moment I want the people watching to concentrate on, because this is much worse than blowing a climate number out of proportion and then taking it back. This is much more terrible, miss, and I will tell you exactly why. Rather than grabbing the second page, he pushed it across the wide, shiny wood table. He slid it until it halted right in front of her, turned the right way for her to look at. About 12 months after those jobs disappeared, Johnson pointed out, a voter from your home county asked about where they went, and your reply is something I'd like you to read out loud, using your own tone instead of mine, so I can stop any claims tomorrow that I read it with a biased voice. He crossed his fingers. The words are right in front of you, Representative. The top paragraph is your own formal response, so please speak out loud to the people of Queens exactly what you told them about their vanished jobs. The room's acoustics grew so incredibly quiet that the motorized buzz of the air conditioning could be heard. She looked down at the sheet, while the shared focus of the chamber locked completely onto her reading the words. Watchers could follow the shift of her eyes over the first line, seeing the precise second she understood. It was the sudden realization, like walking into a void in the dark, that there was no possible way to read those sentences out loud without incriminating herself in front of the whole gathering. Most importantly, the cameras recorded a split second that no future media spin could ever delete. She could not read the page, finding it bodily impossible to do so. Saying her own words out loud in that room, while the blue-collar worker from Ohio sat listening closely in row 4 and her young staffer stared at the ground in embarrassment, would mean using her own vocal cords to repeat the very justification she had used to brush off the financial ruin. She would be forced to say out loud that the job statistics didn't matter, and that nobody actually trusted the estimates anyway. Her mouth opened, but zero noise came out, so she closed it. Looking for a way to stall, her fingers reached for her water glass, a typical nervous habit to mask shaking. But she stopped the motion, knowing that taking a sip while ignoring a question would just bring more bad focus onto her. She moved her hands back to the table, shifting the page's angle slightly to pretend the physical placement, not the words, was the problem. Yet she stayed silent, the refusal to speak dragging on painfully long. 1 second too many, then another, then a third. Every passing second felt heavier until the complete quiet turned into a final response, speaking louder than any actual phrase. I will read it, Johnson volunteered quietly, since saying harsh facts about your own locals out loud is, of course, very hard. Keeping his voice carefully reined in, he read the words with a monotone, definitive rhythm. You claimed that the main problem was never really about the jobs at all, and you stated that nobody truly believed those estimates anyway. He looked up. 25,000 chances, miss. You cheered their destruction as a win when it happened, and a year later, when asked, you told the left-behind citizens that the careers were always fake, which wasn't a memory slip because you are possibly the most careful speaker in this whole building, saying the helpful truth when it worked for you and spreading the harmful lie when the truth was annoying, operating with calculated exactness both times. The heavy feeling in the chamber finally broke, but it wasn't marked by laughter this time. It was a much darker response, way more ruinous to her reputation than any teasing. It showed up as the shared realization of hundreds of people all at once understanding the seriousness of the moment. A held-back, shared exhale left the audience, and quiet whispering moved through the chairs. The man from Ohio shook his head with a tight jaw, stripped of any earlier grin, seeing the sad truth confronted by towns hit by corporate flight. A lady by the stage hid her mouth in horror while the younger Democratic congresswoman closed her eyes tightly. The representative had celebrated the loss of 25,000 careers, later manipulated the victims by saying the loss was fake, and now, when commanded to face her own words head-on, showed herself totally unable to do it. If you have seen neighborhood ruin cheered by people who aren't hurt by it, share this clip and come back to listen to Johnson's chilling last comment. Johnson lightly picked up the page with her quote, keeping it for a second, and murmured, Representative, forcing the crowd to lean in. An hour ago, you claimed this hearing was attacking your background, but it isn't, and your blue-collar rise and later successes are real and yours forever. He stopped for effect, adding, but you couldn't read a single line about 25,000 of your own voters out loud. Not because you forgot, but because of your careful habits, as you knew exactly what your message was, the people it hurt, and the best time to take it back. He placed the document face up between them, completely visible to the cameras, the representative, and the whole room. You didn't accidentally lose those jobs, miss, he finished. You traded them off, and then you coldly told the targets of your deal that the items were always garbage, and just 12 words did more harm than 20,000 ever could. The head of the panel cleared his throat, breaking the quiet, and formally asked if the representative wanted to give a counter-argument. She refused to say anything back, but she did one tiny, crushing movement, caught by every camera there, a movement that spoke far louder than any spoken defense. She reached out and turned the page, holding her unread quote entirely upside down. Using a pair of fingers, she silently covered the words, imitating the act of burying something intensely embarrassing. The quiet, scratchy sound of the page flipping was the only thing heard in the room, boosted by the strong mics. It was a low, dull scrape of paper on wood, bouncing clearly to the back wall in the absolute quiet. She then folded her hands and placed them over the hidden page, giving absolutely no spoken remark. This created the ultimate image, an elected official literally hiding her own written statements under her palms, incapable of standing their existence in a space filled with the people her choices had damaged. By the time the session ended, that crucial piece of video had already been pulled out and named, and the story being told was incredibly unfriendly to her. Someone had perfectly cut the minute-and-a-half interaction, Johnson handing over the paper, the terrible quiet as she faced her own words, and the soft scrape of the page being flipped over beneath her hand. By the middle of the afternoon, you couldn't scroll through any online site in America without seeing the clip over and over. The scariest part for her, if the shame let her think clearly, was that the cultural conversation totally skipped over her planned subjects. Nobody was arguing about global warming, scientific agreement, or the 12-year clock. The big philosophical points she had arranged for that morning vanished into thin air. Audiences were completely hooked on the raw picture of a lawmaker getting her own cruel quote about 25,000 lost jobs and deciding to bodily hide it instead of reading it out loud. As the sun finally went down over the Potomac and the messy, buzzing vibe of D.C. started to settle into the night's planned political spins, the main evening broadcasts on all the big networks and top cable channels grabbed onto that peak moment with almost totally matching focus. They purposely decided not to start their shows with noisy, explosive opinions or bright graphics meant to cause political panic. Instead, they showcased the paused video heavily, holding on an eerie frozen picture that spoke far louder than any wealthy group of commentators possibly could. It was the bare, undeniable shot of the representative's fingers, stiff, unyielding, and carefully placed, pressing hard on the flipped piece of paper, frantically trying to hide her own published words from the judging gaze of the planet. One specific news channel, known in the past for its normally forceful and constant opinions, chose an incredibly simple ruining method. They just showed her unspoken, rejected quotes about the thousands of ditched jobs in plain, hard white font on the television, sliding slowly and deliberately right underneath the clear video of her quiet defeat. They provided zero spoken opinions, zero arrogant vocal breakdowns, and zero expected political twisting. The experienced TV directors silently knew that any added words would only water down the total clarity of that moment, since the disastrous combination of the visual of her bodily giving up and the undeniable words of her former arrogance told the whole raw tale flawlessly to millions of silent living rooms all over the country. In the meantime, deep inside the twisting classical hallways of the Capitol, where the shiny stone grounds have bounced the fast walking of pure authority for hundreds of years, the fast political damage was already starting to show up in quiet, very nervous voices. In the poorly lit, rocky halls right outside the thick wooden entryways of the now famous committee room, an experienced political reporter caught a veteran Democratic lawmaker. This was a guy with decades of deep inside knowledge, a politician who had often and dependably voted the same way as the representative on big lawmaking projects. But tonight, his whole body language was completely changed, demanding total, strict secrecy before saying a single word to the media, and cautiously, almost fearfully checking his nearby area, his eyes moving fast up and down the huge hallway before talking. It was a normal, widely known safety step for lawmakers getting ready to share politically risky facts that go against the party's stance. Talking quickly, his words falling out in a low, desperate scrape, he confessed the undeniable truth of the afternoon's catastrophe. "Everybody saw this result coming," he murmured, moving his head with a heavy blend of deep defeat and annoyance. "Everybody who pays attention knew that while you can easily fake an internet post or sneakily alter a boring money fact to match a storyline, you definitely cannot openly cheer for the forever loss of 25,000 high-paying, life-altering careers from a blue-collar area and then act totally shocked when that ruined town holds intense, long-lasting anger." He stopped, leaning near to the journalist to make sure nobody else heard. We protected her before because she exclusively fired up the far-left fans and brought in record-breaking donation money. But there is a firm, unbendable boundary to that support, and it is basically impossible to shield a lawmaker who plainly, stubbornly won't read her own written quotes about her own suffering voters out loud. Moving his head again, holding the clear burden of the coming political hurricane, he mentioned, "She is going to deal with intense, direct punishments this week," right before quickly slipping away into the building's dark corners to dodge any hidden microphones. Later that night, as a freezing, harsh rain started cleaning the black roads of Washington, D.C., a lower-level political assistant who had been actually inside the committee space, watching the whole disastrous thing happen from the edges, sat by herself in her tiny, dark flat. She retold the crazy event to a close friend on the phone, her tone shaking a bit from leftover nerves and complete shock. She carefully explained to her buddy on the line that the huge, broad political impacts of the day were actually totally less important than what she felt inside. The genuinely scary, permanent part of the whole exhausting trial was the pure, frightening sound of the climax. "It was the sound of the page," she detailed, her tone falling to a scary, delicate breath as she frantically tried to explain the unexplainable sensation. That quiet, crisp scrape, that awful, rough sigh of paper moving on polished timber when she flipped it over during that long second of total. Choking quiet sounded exactly like she was wildly, desperately shoving something ugly and shameful into a black cabinet that she hoped would stay forever locked away from the sun for eternity. The tired aide took a shaking, giant breath, looking blankly at the empty wall of her place. "I will hear that exact small noise ringing in my head forever because it wasn't a winning yell or an upset hammer hitting. It was the loudest, most suffocating silent event I have ever lived through, and it finally told a tale that no media cleanup statement will ever fix. Hundreds upon hundreds of miles away from the echoing marble-clad corridors of legislative power and the frantic, endlessly churning news cycles of Washington, D.C., the older Ohio pipefitter sat enveloped in the quiet, meditative solitude of the absolute rear seat of a swaying Greyhound bus. The heavy vehicle rocked rhythmically as it navigated the darkened, winding stretches of the interstate, methodically chewing up the wet asphalt on the grueling, 11-hour journey back to the heartland of America. Outside, a persistent freezing rain lashed violently against the streaked safety glass, distorting the sporadic glare of passing headlights into fleeting, liquid neon smears that momentarily illuminated the tired faces of his fellow sleeping passengers. Despite the bone-deep, aching exhaustion that always accompanies such a lengthy, thoroughly monotonous trek across state lines, the older man remained completely wide awake. His worn, grease-stained canvas duffel bag lay completely untouched near his heavy work boots. He never once reached into its dark depths to retrieve a radio, a newspaper, or any other form of modern distraction to help pass the heavy, dragging hours of the night. He simply rested his thick, calloused hands heavily on his denim-clad knees, bathed in the dim, sickly yellow flickering illumination of the cabin's overhead reading lights, and surrendered himself fully to the profound depths of his own silent contemplations. His mind was a vivid, inescapable theater, continuously playing out the agonizing, decades-old struggles of his beloved hometown, a tight-knit community intimately and tragically acquainted with the cruel, unforgiving reality of sudden corporate abandonment and rapid industrial decay. As the massive, tread-worn tires of the heavy bus thumped a steady, hypnotic beat over the uneven seams of the long highway, that rhythmic percussion acted as an unwavering metronome for his memories, forcefully drawing forth the sharp, intensely painful imagery he had long tried to bury. He saw it all over again with hyper-realistic, agonizing clarity. The devastating afternoon when the massive steel gates of the local manufacturing plant were chained shut forever. He vividly recalled the sight of diligent, honorable, hardworking men and women, proud people whose entire identities were forged in the intense fires of manual labor, trudging out into a sprawling, gravel-strewn parking lot under a bleak, unforgiving sky. They carried their meager personal belongings in fragile, hastily assembled cardboard boxes, their heads bowed beneath the invisible, crushing weight of instant, unceremonious obsolescence. It was a profound trauma that had seeped into the very bedrock of his community, a generational scar left by the afternoon their reliable livelihoods vanished to appease distant shareholders. He had undertaken this exhausting, uncomfortable pilgrimage all the way to the nation's capital, fueled by a singular, desperate craving, a deep-seated hunger for a rare, almost mythical form of true governmental accountability. He had wildly, fervently wished to witness just one prominent lawmaker forced to confront the brutal, flesh-and-blood consequences of their abstract economic decrees face to face. And against all odds, he had successfully obtained exactly what he came for. Watching the impenetrable blackness of the rural highway roll past his rain-streaked window, illuminated only by the stray beams of oncoming trucks, he meticulously processed the afternoon's extraordinary historic events. He thought deeply about those 25,000 phantom careers in New York, lucrative, life-changing jobs that had evaporated into thin air before they were even fully realized. He pondered the sheer hubris of the proud, camera-ready progressive politician who had actively sabotaged that prosperous future and then had the audacity to brandish that economic destruction as a monumental liberal triumph. More importantly, he replayed the mesmerizing performance of the quiet, unassuming lawmaker from the middle of the country, a man who had expertly, surgically forced her to grapple with the undeniable fallout of her own published words in front of the entire watching world. This time, however, as the heavy bus finally rumbled over the welcome state border, crossing back into the familiar territory of his home state, the pipefitter did not laugh. There was no room for petty amusement in his heart. Rather, he simply offered a solitary, profoundly serious nod of deep contentment into the surrounding gloom. He was journeying back to a resilient region that wealthy coastal elites frequently brushed off as a mere cultural punchline, a simplistic cliché, but tonight, that overlooked cliché had been undeniably vindicated. Meanwhile, back in the sprawling, ornate labyrinth of the Capitol building, the immediate reaction of Speaker Mike Johnson, the silent, meticulous architect of this unprecedented moment of political accountability, was defined by a total, deliberate absence of celebration, partisanship, or gloating. He behaved exactly as one might expect of a serious statesman who viewed his strategic, calculated maneuvers not as a theatrical performance for the evening news broadcasts, but as a solemn, binding legal and moral obligation to the public. He completely lacked any of the performative drama that usually infected the high-stakes hearing chamber. With slow, incredibly controlled, and almost reverent motions, he began to gather his remarkably small pile of essential materials from the expansive, polished wooden desk. It was a staggering visual contrast. He had purposefully brought a massive, intimidatingly thick leather binder to the hearing room, a heavy tome packed with exhaustive data, complex economic charts, and voluminous historical transcripts. Yet, when the ultimate moment of truth finally arrived, he had kept that massive binder firmly closed. He had utilized only two individual, seemingly insignificant pieces of printed paper to completely and utterly destroy his rival's carefully constructed, heavily media-polished storyline. Having concluded his devastatingly precise, surgically executed work, he bowed his head shortly and politely to the exhausted committee clerks and administrative desk workers, silently and graciously thanking them for their steadfast, rule-following assistance throughout the incredibly tense proceedings. Then, without a single hint of unseemly haste, he sluggishly walked down the plush, rug-covered stairs from the elevated dais. He exited the historic hearing chamber through the heavy, ornate, members-only mahogany door, deliberately ignoring the chaotic, noisy circus of panicked, shouting reporters who were yelling wildly, their desperate voices echoing loudly off the ancient stone walls as they aggressively vied for a fraction of his attention. He marched steadily right past the glaring, aggressively bright camera gear, stepping carefully over the messy, tangled webs of thick black broadcasting cables. He walked directly past the now empty, shiny wooden testifier seat, the very chair where the country's most well-known, fiercely combative progressive face had finally, permanently, and spectacularly run out of every conceivable avenue of rhetorical retreat. He did not toss out a clever, prepackaged winning quote to the hungry, waiting journalists. He did not pause his steady stride to brag, smirk, or offer a triumphant, boastful soundbite to the frantically gathered media crowd. He had achieved his exact, meticulously planned political objective using absolutely nothing except a pair of standard printed pages and the heavy, crushing, indisputable strength of total, unwavering silence. He fundamentally understood that adding his own speaking voice to the immediate aftermath would only serve to dilute the absolute perfection of the legislative victory. And the absolute most poetic, hauntingly beautiful aspect of the entire historic event was not a single word that Johnson had said, but rather what his opponent had done in response. The lasting, permanent image permanently etched into the annals of the day was that, One of those ruining, truth-telling papers had been willingly, frantically, and shamefully concealed from the world's scrutinizing eyes, pressed face down against the polished wood by his rival's own trembling, defeated fingers.